it's the curiosity that brings you down the rabbit hole. So if you could structure your curiosity, then it always feels like there's something new in front of you,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I think that's what will happen, because once you realize, you're like, wait, there's something beyond this.
What's going on, guys? Philosopher here, and welcome back to FGC Philosophy. I am very proud of this episode. I'm very excited about this episode. I get to have a conversation with Zaferino, content creator, coach, competitor, really good Sagat player, one of the best in America, in my opinion. We get to have a conversation, and what I did was, there's a podcast version if you want to check out the long version, the full unedited conversation for the most part. You can check it out on the podcast, wherever you podcast, FGC Philosophy, you'll find it pretty easily. I'll have links down below. But this episode is going to be the best parts of the conversation that I felt that I really couldn't cut out of the conversation. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoy. So I was introduced to you by a person that you actually referenced in one of your videos, Kaizen Master. Like, he ran into me, I guess he saw some of my content, and like he was, talking about you a lot. And so ever since then, I've been following a lot of your content, trying to catch your live streams, kind of lurking here and there. And a lot of what you say clicks with me. A lot of what you say makes sense. But I wanted to get your perspective, so I'm glad I have you on here. Thank you for joining me.
Of
So
course.
the first question I want to kind of dig into is something that's on your bio for your Metafee, which is where you do your coaching. So I'll read this real quick, and then you can kind of elaborate on this, and we can kind of go back and forth. But you talked about the fact that you were born to Cape Verdean parents that only know hard work. With that work ethic running through my genetics, I've been on a nonstop mission to be the greatest fighting game player on earth while elevating the people and players around me. So the first thing I want to talk about is, the parents and the work ethic. So for those who don't know, this is like an island off of Africa. I had to look this up. I did not know what it was beforehand. But so would that be the case that you're first generation?
Yeah, I'm first gen. Yep.
Okay. So talk a little bit about that work ethic that you saw from your parents and how that affected you.
Yeah. So my parents were born in Cape Verde, right? So I'm first generation. So I'm the youngest of three on my mom's side. And in Cape Verde, especially when they were, raised, it's a very poor country. I'm talking like my mom would walk 4.5 miles to go get water type. That's like that type of living that they were on, right? So all I know is hard work. So of course, everybody has the American dream, and so her whole mission was to come here, give her children opportunity, right, that she didn't have. So she didn't want us to work like physically demanding jobs like she did or whatnot, right? My dad the same way, so their like intensity towards work that's their identity, because that's all they had was like there was no Facebook, there was no IG and Snapchat filters. It was just raw, real, and everything was about survival, and so like being raised in that household, it has its pros and cons. The pros is that you're very diligent about things, and you can persist because that's what they know. But the cons are, depending on how mistakes are measured or conveyed, you might absorb a certain pattern of conditioning that's not conducive in an environment like we're living in now, right? Because our sense of stress and threats are different from being in a third world country, right? Like our stress is weird shit. Damn, I ain't getting enough likes on my post today, right? Or man, I'm missing my combos, or man, like my car tire's flat, right? But theirs was like, imagine something super simple like getting a cut like on their toe. If they don't get to the nearest hospital, which is miles away, they could literally have to amputate, over something that we would literally slap a band-aid on, right? Like that's like the type of, I guess, perfectionism they had to live with, like that type of pressure, and making the most out of their days and just working and persisting and stuff like that. So that's why I said what I said, because it's literally like one of the biggest puzzles that I had to overcome was like that perfectionism, man. It was what drove me, but it was what held me back at the same time, which is weird.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I that resonates with me. So I'm first generation on my dad's side. He's from Jamaica, and
Mm,
it didn't click with me for a long time. I'll circle back to this in a second, but he was a hard worker. Like he sent money back to his parents, or to his mom, I should say. His dad passed away when
mm.
I was like 3 or something like that. He always was working. If he got laid off from one job, he was working another job. Like he did whatever he had to do. And for the longest time, I didn't quite understand that because I kind of lived a fairly privileged life compared to them, right? I was always around homelessness. I was always around like poverty, but for the most part, my parents did a good job of working hard. Over time, I kind of adopted that expectation of perfectionism. And I created this term for it because I don't know what else to call it, but I called it lazy perfectionist, where I don't even apply the effort in the past. Like I wouldn't even try something because my expectations were so high that I wouldn't even bother to make that effort. Does that make sense?
Perfect sense, because I'll give you an analogy that relates so much to that. So let's say something as simple as going to the gym, right? If I don't go to the gym at a certain time, then I feel as though it interrupts the rest of the flow of my day. So to maintain the perfectionism of the other crafts in my mind, right? Like the ideal way of streaming for the day, the ideal way of training in Street Fighter, of writing out content. If anything interferes with those things, I just sever the weakest link, which would be going to the gym. But I can still go to the gym, right? But that's the perfectionism challenge that I have, and I have to be super mindful of that. Otherwise, I end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and I'm like, man, I can't go to the gym today, but I can go to the gym. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. On that note, when it comes to coaching, like what motivates you to want to help other people, right? Because the selfish part of it, you want to get better, but why bother helping other people try to get better as well? Like, what's your motivation?
Well, I think it's mainly from the pain point of disappointment from my upbringings, and the fear of abandonment that I've had from when I was younger. After like my dad left, it's typical fucking story, I guess you hear a lot nowadays, but he left, and that was like my strongest relationship, and it's never been the same since. I was like 9 years old when he left.
Mhm.
And so like that disappointment was like, it was such a traumatic experience. And when I say traumatic, I don't mean like people will hear that, and on the surface they immediately think of like some extreme thing, but trauma is just literally like a shaking of your sense of reality, right? So it can be subtle or it can be extreme. There's always there's so many ways to measure it. So for me, it wasn't crazy like anybody died or anything like that, but it was just a violent shakeup of my reality, because this is somebody I'd spend every single day with, and all of a sudden he just wasn't there, and I was like, what? So when that happened, that fear of abandonment kind of permeated into a lot of things that I did. So even so much as recently as like a year ago, when I would play or compete, it's still remnants of it there, but like, I would want to play perfect so I don't disappoint the people I care about, my supporters, my family, my friends. Because then behind that was the fear of like not being enough, because that's what I thought. I thought I wasn't enough for my dad. You know what I'm saying? So that a large part of it was that the reasoning has changed over the years through mindfulness and meditation, and getting to the source of the pain and realizing and uprooting and saying, oh shit, this is my real reasoning for this, was the fear of abandonment in trying to be perfect enough for people to love me, because that's what I thought. It's just I wasn't lovable. It's crazy, right? But like, this is what I've learned through fighting games. But my thing originally was, I want to help people so that they don't go through the pain I went through. I want them to be the best versions of themselves, so that way they don't have to go through what I went through, which is not gonna stop anything. People are gonna go through what they go through. It doesn't really matter how strong or how optimal they are. Like, life is gonna give you the situations you need regardless.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
But now my reasoning has changed from that to more so, I just want people to, not so much selfishly, because it is selfish if you think about it, because I'm projecting, right? Not so that you avoid something that I went through, but I want you to go through what you need to with the best tools possible, so you can live the best quality life possible. That's how I try to frame my fighting game um community, right? Is like, yeah, play the game, enjoy the game, but also use it to help you be better outside of the game. You know, so that's why I'm like so motivated to just help people.
To bounce off of that, I talk about this fairly common. For me, Marvel vs. Capcom, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 was a very big turning point for me, because up until that point, I never knew how to learn. Like, I never knew how to practice, right? I had just graduated high school and college, and I was just done with learning for the most part. I remember actively thinking about that. And then I had a friend that I got to buy Marvel vs. Capcom and play it with me. And I'm so glad that this game had this setting, because I could look at how much hours he had logged into the game in terms of matches, and then also how much time he has in the practice mode. On the 360, they had this feature. And the thing that got my attention was I taught him how to play the game, and then he started beating me consistently. And it just did not click with me. I was like, I've been playing this game more than him. I've been playing fighting games my whole life. Why can't I beat this guy? Seeing how much time he put into the practice mode. Like, he had twice as many matches as me, but he also had like literally 10 times as much time as me in the training room. And that was a big turning point for me, because I realized that, practice on the surface level, putting time into something is incredibly important. During this time, I had made a decision to start getting healthy. So all I did was work at GameStop, play video games, and go to the gym. That was my whole life. So during that time, I also applied that same mindset to going to the gym. I was like, okay, I'm not going to look at my weight. I'm not going to look at how I look. I'm just going to try to just keep bettering my best, right? Getting more weight, doing more reps, whatever it may be, and just doing that. And then doing the same thing, like doing Marvel and working out, like something clicked in my head to where I realized that if I just focus on, a small amount of things and make sure I'm doing it better and make sure that I'm not distracted. Like when I went to the gym, I was very self-conscious, so I made an active decision. Don't look at other people. Don't think about anything. Don't think about what they're thinking about you, because when you're thinking about people, you create a whole scenario in your head about what people might be thinking, and then you have an emotional reaction to what they might be thinking. You make the story in your head. So I had to learn how to focus. I had to learn how to, not, basically stream jitters, not worrying about anything irrelevant. And so for me, like that resonates, because I've applied that to myself, and I try to do that same thing with just this podcast, with teaching people how to play fighting games, whatever it may be. I think there's a lot to learn from learning how to play a fighting game, especially when you start talking about the mental, psychological aspect of things.
All right. Yeah. See, the way I've learned, right? A friend asked me this super dope question. I'm going to ask you this. I'm going to interview you right now. So
Right.
if you could, you have to immediately say the first thing that comes to your head, though, for this to work.
Okay.
So it's so crazy. So a friend asked me, and I'm asking you now, if you could illustrate the way you learn, what would it look like?
Editor Philosopher here, and I wanted to add more to this topic, this question that Zaferino was asking. I realize now, while I'm editing it, that he's saying illustrate, like draw a picture of what you learn, like how you learn, right? And I gave a very literal answer, which I'm going to leave in here for you guys to listen to, because I still like the answer, but I want to make sure that I'm actually answering the question that he was asking. So I wound up sending him a DM as well with this, because I sat down and thought about it. I heard his answer, and I sat down and I thought about, like, what would I picture? And the first thing that came to mind, which I didn't have any logical answer for it, was waves from the ocean, like the ocean and waves crashing into the wall. And then I thought about it a little bit more. I'm like, okay, well, I accept this as just whatever it is, but what's the logic behind it? Because I'm me and I want to know the logic behind it. And the way that I can articulate it is that the ocean represents knowledge and experience, right? It's just infinite knowledge and experience. My own, other people's, people from the past, people that I know now, maybe people in the future. I can't really skip time, but it's there, potentially, right? Or knowledge that I might have, potential knowledge that I might have in the future, experiences, right? It's not there yet, but it's potential. Like energy, potential has energy. I'm not wording this right. There's a scientific explanation for it that I can't do. But nonetheless, the waves represent effort and skill, the things that you're trying to craft. And the wall represents the challenge, the thing that you're trying to get over or get through. And the waves slowly erode that wall over time. The more you pull from the ocean, the more potential energy and strength that wave will have, and thus you'll be able to erode that wall faster and with more efficiency. And so that's the answer that I give now. I was sitting here editing it, and I really just sat down and thought about it because I was frustrated that I didn't answer the question. I felt kind of stupid. He was probably too nice to say, or just thought that was my answer. But nonetheless, that's my answer. And I thought it was a good question. I thought it was a good thought experiment. I recommend you guys try it as well. Anyways, back to the show.
Probably pretty eclectic, I feel like. So I'm pretty meticulous with my learning. I'll sit there and I'll research things and I'll start to document it and I'll try things out. And then once I know that this works, in terms of fighting games and probably anything else, I'll just do it over and over again to make it muscle memory. I try to make it, at this point in my life, I try to make it as simple as possible and only master a small amount of things before moving on to something else. And then trying to document mentally or actually like typing it down so that I can save that for later on in case I forget it or something like that, or just the act of writing it down helps me remember it. So I would say, to recap, learning what works, doing it over and over and over again until it's muscle memory, keeping it simple, and then building on that foundation, like making a really strong foundation and then building on top of that.
So listen to this. Listen to how much drugs my brain are on, right? So
Okay.
when he said this to me, right, immediately I saw a lightning bolt. And this shit is so crazy. I saw a lightning bolt, and then the lightning bolt was like a bunch of colors. It was not just one color. It was like a strand of colors, right, coming from a cloud. So you had like blue, orange, purple, green, whatever, right? They would twist, and then at the point it became singular, and then it would hit the ground and explode. When I said it to him, he was like, bro, that makes so much sense. And I was like, wait, what? I feel like I'm on drugs. He's like, no, he's like, think about it. The way you learn is you take information from unrelated things and then you combine them into your eureka moment, which is the lightning bolt strike. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. So that's how I learn. So it's like, for example, I picked up chess to help me with strategy, right? Because I didn't understand how to create strategy. This is like 2017. I was like talking to Kaiser, and I was like, yeah, I have no idea how to formulate strategies. And he's like, all right, well, study chess. I was like, all right. So I just studied chess, and then that's what I've been using, at least intuitively, over the years to come up with unique strategies and stuff like that. Because I'm playing Sagat, so up until this patch, that character was just non-existent in my opinion. I think he was just not playing the game. So what was helping me just overcome a lot of the challenges of the game design was just literally strategies to collect information about my opponent's intentions, their focus, and using it against them. Because attacking subtlety is very hard for people to adjust to that, because it requires a crazy amount of mindfulness, right? And mindfulness requires a lot of energy. So if you're fatigued, if you're distracted, you're not going to be able to change, because change requires a lot of energy, which is why people that are really passionate can change, right? That's why when people go through pain, become passionate, and then they can transform, right? So that's what I realized with the character. I was like, this character's not great. I can't really force you to do things. I have to kind of bend, right? I have to be like the bamboo, right? And just I don't break with the wind, but I bend with it. So I have to constantly adjust, or bring people into the world of adjusting, which I know they're not good at. And then that's my advantage with Sagat, right? But anyways, so that's how I learned. I did breakdancing at one point. I did boxing. I did so many random things just to help me with Street Fighter, because I was just trying to understand these little puzzles of the way I thought, and then I would take away some pretty dope lessons from everything. Like with dancing, you can't think in dancing, because by the time you think, you've missed the beat, right? You missed the beat, so you're out of rhythm, right? So that's what dancing taught me, was sometimes you have to go from pure instinct, right? You can't think about the solution, because by the time you go to apply the solution, it's too late. The opportunity's missed, right? That's the thing about luck. So fighting games, a lot of it is luck too, and that's something my ego, right? Your ego it always wants to extend itself onto things and take credit for your results and stuff, right? But luck is a big factor in things, especially in a fighting game, because we have different rhythms, different ideas, different tool sets, different spacings, different like approaches. So the thing about luck is it's only taken advantage of when the you have a preparation that meets the opportunity. So if I'm not prepared, how can I ever be lucky, right? Because the opportunities are around you all the time, or in a fighting game. But if you're not prepared because you're thinking, or you're worried about risk, or you're doing things out of fear, how are you supposed to leverage something like luck, which is, I think, instrumental in success?
Yeah, I think both inside and out of fighting games. For an example, for me, like I'm in a situation where I love what I do now. I get to work with college students. I get to help with mental development, esports, all that kind of stuff. But the reason that I have this job was partly because I got lucky. Like I was in the right place at the right time. But I also, every time I had an opportunity to take advantage of it, I had worked on my people skills. I had worked on building a community. I had worked on making content, bettering myself and showing that and putting that out there. So when the opportunity came to me, I was ready to accept it, because I think just like in fighting games, it's like, okay, take hit confirms, for example. That's something that I've been really working on this last year, 2 years. Picked up Kareen and just worked on hit confirms. There's a lot of times where I might just randomly throw out a button and it might be a lucky hit. But if my confirms are trash, then I get nothing off of that. I get like maybe one hit. But if my confirms are good and I get a lucky hit, I can turn that into an opportunity that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So like when people say that you got lucky, it's like, well, yeah, definitely I did. I'm okay with saying that, but I also capitalized on the opportunity that was given to me because you made a mistake. So it's like I try to keep the ego out of things as well. You talked about a lot of different things, and I want to try to circle back to a few of them as well. But yeah, and on that note, I definitely can resonate. I resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm the king of going on tangents, bro.
So one thing I wanted to hit on is I like to do, when I'm doing my solo podcast, a couple of questions that I ask myself on a weekly basis, where I say, what am I reading / listening to? I do a lot of audiobooks. And I want to bring one up, but I also want to see if there's anything you're reading or listening to, or any content that you're using to kind of better yourself.
Yeah, Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself is one of the books I'm reading by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Super dope. I think it's what is it called? It's basically like the study of epigenetics. That's what it is. It's like the study, I believe, of like the effects of the environment on your genetics. So it's super interesting, and he provides scientific, I guess you could say proof, or studies to back up what he's talking about with like the influence of meditation on the body and stuff like that. Super dope book. He has this is the first book. I actually skipped this book and read the second book, which was Becoming Supernatural, and then I went back and revisited this. But what's so fire about this book is in order for you to change, it conveys that you have to change your body, your environment, and your perception of time. Right? So those are like the three things that typically keep people in like a cyclical nature with whatever it is that they're doing. Environment, of course, would be something that supports your habits, right? It's hard to break a habit of like, let's say like you drink a lot, right? I don't drink, but let's say you're an alcoholic. How are you supposed to break the habit of being an alcoholic if you're in an environment where people are drinking around you all the time? Right? How are you supposed to be organized when your room, the first thing you wake up to is a disorganized room? Right? So like things like that. And so this book is fire. I'm reading this just because I wanted to work on my perception of mistakes. So this is something I've been reading, and then I cross-reference books. Remember we talked about the lightning example, so I read multiple books at the same time. So another book that I'm reading is Mindfulness, which is a Buddhist book, right? It's about like meditation and stuff like that also. That book is fascinating. So what that book has taught me was the importance of awareness, right? Like if you're not aware of something, how are you supposed to change it? So anything that requires change, you would think is gradual, but it's only gradual until you get to the last challenge, the last remaining door, right? And then it's instantaneous. So change is always instantaneous, but the process of getting there is the process of, pulling back layers and until you get to the source of things, and then it's a decision that you make, right? But the thing about the decisions is that it's not just one decision, it's a series of, you have to continuously make the decision. So that's what's dope about that book, is like, because in my head, remember the way I was raised, I'm thinking, damn, if I'm not good at these things, I'm not perfect, right? And then now it's an issue. It's a conflict of beliefs and ideas of myself, what I need to do to get somewhere, what I need to be to get something. But that book, it freed me from the shackles of that belief system of thinking I had to do something once and be that thing forever, which is why I would get frustrated in fighting games, is because I would be like, damn, if I'm getting hit by this thing, which I've stopped before, that means I've never really stopped it, so that's how I was thinking. But in reality, it's a constant, it's the decision to over and over you make, right? It's like being a good person can get ruined with one bad decision, right? So it's constantly making those decisions, not just making it once and then satisfying your ego, which is an extension of your identity onto things, right? And then thinking, I am that thing, I am solid as a rock, nothing can change that. Because you can change that by making one poor decision, but you can also change it by making a good one continuously, right? So that's what's dope about it, is like change is instant, because change is brought about through continuous action, which you have to take in the now, right? So if you want to change, you just change right now by making a decision. So those two books, fire. Those two books, like, combined right now, have been awesome for me. The third thing, which is really like just hammered it home, was I do options trading, right? So I've been listening to this book called Trading in the Zone, and you'd think, like, with trading, it's like learning charts and analytics and blah 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 blah. But this book, this dude Mark Douglas, he's a beast. He's a beast, but he's like I'm telling you right now, it's like 10%, the analytical, the charting and stuff is 90% mental, because a lot of your perception of the market is filtered based off of emotions, right? Because the three greatest fears are what? Death, losing money, and they say, I think, public speaking or something like that. Some like, public or whatever. But so that book, fire. My biggest takeaway from it was I was realizing that I would go into new situations bearing the burdens of my previous mistakes. So I would try to, because of that perfectionism attitude, I would try to solve things in the now to release me from the burden of my beliefs about my mistakes from the past. To simplify that, basically, if I solve something right now, then I never was that thing. So it's the inverse of what I was talking about, which was, if I've done this before, I should always be this thing, right? But now I'm trying to correct the mistakes of, let's say I lost $10 on a trade. I try to make up that $10 on this trade. I have to make up $10 plus whatever the profit is. Let's say I made, $20, right, on this trade. I lost 10 from the previous. I'm up 10, but in my head, I'm like, no, I still have to make up for that previous, even though I'm technically still up, right? But I didn't go into the trade thinking I've made up for that mistake in the past. So, like, I keep going into my mistakes of the past and keep trying to solve each one or rectify it, so then that way I could feel complete again.
How did that work out for you?
Lost a lot of money doing that. So, but once I learned how to do it, I've been successfully trading, again. And it's funny, because he was saying, like, the first time you trade, the first time you do anything, you're at your most pure, right? You're most innocent, because you don't have the burdens of your mistakes bearing you down, right? So it's like, at some point when you get a certain amount of success, depending on your ego, it can get more and more dangerous to your future success, because whatever contradicts that, it ends up becoming a stronger enemy in your mind, right? So when people learn from their mistakes, you have to ask yourself, why are you learning? Are you learning because of you're trying to minimize the pain of your mistakes of your past? Because if you do that, you're still operating off of pain and fear, which means you're only going to attract more of it into your existence and reality. It's crazy. It's kind of like in a relationship. If you're like, damn, I don't want her to leave me, right? And then you start doing things for her, but the energy of what you're doing is so she doesn't leave you. Even if you buy her flowers, or it's women are intuitive, they're gonna pick up on that. It's like they can't trust you,
It's like a
right? Because you're
prophecy.
right, exactly, right. So what is your reasoning behind doing it? And that's where mindfulness, like the book I was telling you about, it's so profound because it makes me go back to the source of the things that I'm doing. Like, what is my reasoning for this? Because it's one of two things. It's the reasoning from my conditioning of the past, or it's to learn a new future, right? So as soon as I identify, oh, it's that perfectionism popping back up, I can be released from it because I see it. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is an illusion. Let it go, And now I have energy again to change it.
Yeah. Something I learned in coaching school, it's a philosophy or a saying of there are no mistakes, only learning opportunities. And I've tried really hard to embrace that in everything that I do. And I find that for me, I don't know, I haven't really been getting as salty at things as I used to just by applying that. Because you hit on a couple of different points, but I want to hit on that one and mention this book real quick too. A lot of people, to your credit, it's almost like the term is negative goal setting, I believe, where people will set a goal of like, I don't want to drop this combo rather than I want to improve my execution, right? And I think you've talked about this in the past as well, of like the intention of your goal. Either you're trying to avoid some pain, or you're trying to avoid embarrassment, which is like emotional pain, rather than trying to, for whatever reason, improve yourself. It's like you just want to avoid something negative rather than trying to work on something positive. And to your point, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. I see a lot of people who do this where it's like their motivation is I don't want to lose. That's their motivation, and I know that's not a very helpful way of thinking, so it's like it's hard to talk to these people sometimes about that kind of stuff. But I guess from your point of view, in your experience, if you've seen a lot of that, and what's your take on that, and how do you talk to people about that?
So a lot of people have that, right? I think it's something that you especially absorb in society and adulthood, because adulthood ends up being about addition. Like a lot of the times, it's very rarely addition by subtraction. So a lot of people don't develop the muscle, or they've atrophied the muscle to get rid of things, right? So whenever I come across somebody that's like that, it's like it's I have to be like a ninja, right? Because they have their guard up. So if I say something in a way that resonates in a degree or an angle that reminds them of something that they don't want, then there's going to be conflict, right? So it's like, how do I get past this person's guard? So typically what I do is I show vulnerability. That's why I'm open. I like to be open because it's easier to establish trust, because I'm revealing what would be secrets about myself, my weaknesses, right? So it's like, oh, this guy is doing this, like, he's not afraid. There's no fear in retaliation from him. So it just naturally, people are just going to let their guard down, right? So then now people can listen to you. So when you say certain things, because of the filter and perception of the person that they're involved with, it's less like, depending on the person, it's less likely maybe with me that somebody's going to get defensive because they know my intentions are not malicious, right? But if I don't convey that, their defense mechanism pops up, and then boom, they're like ready to fight, or not fight physically, but just like fight to defend the idea. So how like coping mechanisms, mainly they're supposed to be short term, right? You're supposed to like revisit them and then figure out better ways to cope with stuff, right? Like hedonism, having excessive amounts of sex, drinking a lot, doing a lot of drugs. Those are supposed to be short term mechanisms for dealing with pain. But people don't realize that, right? Or they run away from the fact that they've done these things, and then they try to suppress it. But when you suppress things, it's like, when you're in like a pool and you try to push a ball underwater, it like pops back up with greater force. That's basically what happens when you suppress things, right? When you don't face things. So whenever I meet somebody and, they have like, that like negative goal thinking. I like how you termed that, because I never had a term for it. I don't want to activate their defense mechanisms, but you have to learn it. It's like a weird slippery slope, right? You have to figure out how does this person, you know, how do they get triggered? But I'm not trying to do it in a way where we can't recover either. So for me, it's a lot of listening to people's like vocabulary, right? Like if you hear a lot of negative, like can't, a lot of extremes, like always, every time, right? I'm like, okay, we already know you don't always miss your DP. We already know you never whiff punish, right? So there's that's a reflection of your belief system. So there's some emotional turmoil there. So depending on the like the maturity of the person I'm talking to, especially the older people, it's harder to change, right? Because like you're solidified in your belief for X amount of years, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to like older people, it's more so communicating to them that their emotions are supposed to be action signals. Something I learned from Tony Robbins. He was like, your emotions are action signals. They just tell you, hey, Zaf, you feel angry, and the reason you feel angry is because of this. So your emotion signal, if you want to change how you feel, you have to change this, right? So I try to make it so that your emotions are an ally, and they're not something that you should run away from. Because, especially as men, man, like society, we're supposed to be stoic and blah, 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 and all this stuff, right? But in reality, stoicism is mindfulness and appreciation of the facts of who you are at your core, your nature, right? You're supposed to leverage your nature, not run away from it, suppress it, escape it, ignore it. But because of the stigmas, now you're combating your internalized pressure, external pressure. So like this person is just, it's a tug of war. They're just like, oh man, I don't want to look like this in the eyes of people, but then I have this belief about myself that I also don't want to be, and they're not even in the moment. So if I'm gonna change somebody, I have to get them into the moment. And one of the greatest ways to do that is to get people to see their emotions as an ally. Because if you don't see your emotions as an ally, you operate from your emotions, and your emotions are anchored from your past, right? So the only moments that exist is now. Everything else is the past. The future is a projection of the past. We've never lived the future. By the time we live the future, it's right now. And by the time we interpret the future as now, it's in the past. You see, so it's like, it's just the now or the past, right? Oh, it's those two things we're bouncing back and forth between. So for people to change, you have to operate in the now, and that's where that instantaneous change happens. Like we talked, like I talked about. So how I do that is get people to see the emotions as an ally and not something you run away from, because then you don't operate from the emotion immediately. It's not instinctive. It's like, I remember this emotion. What's the last? Wait a minute. And then now you're curious instead of operating off of it and being impulsive. I'm an impulsive dude, so I can tell you how many times I've done this. And being mindful of it, I see it as something that benefits me, and then now I can actually get to the root of it. Right, but you can't do this without energy. You can't do this if you're fatigued, if you're stressed and stuff like that. That's why you have to take care of your mind, body, spirit, right? That harmony is what allows you to be able to do all of these things.
Bounce off of what you were talking about. This wasn't me. I learned this in school, but it was a saying that helps me kind of with coaching, right? It's your thoughts lead to your emotions, and your emotions lead to your actions. And so one of the first things that I get with players who tilt a lot is I'll ask them, what were you thinking? Like how did you feel, and or what were you thinking? And a lot of times they can talk about how they maybe felt, but they can't articulate it well, but they don't even know, like they can't even articulate why they got mad. And so it's like they just have this default reaction to things, or sad. There's a turtle up people, and then there's like the angry people, right? Those are the main two camps when people are playing fighting games. They either start playing really aggressive and predictable, or they just are indecisive and can't decide what they want to do, and they just block a lot.
Fight, flight, or freeze, right? Basically.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so after a while, I'll ask them, like, okay, all I want you to do is play these games and just pay attention to how you feel, right? Just play like normal, but just try to pay attention to what you were thinking and feeling. And it takes a while for these people to be able to analyze, because they don't think about it. They just accept their emotional reactions. Like, listen to how people say things. This thing made me mad. This person did something that made me mad. And it's like, from my point of view, you're accountable for your own emotions. And the fact that people, and unless you have some sort of disorder, right? I'm not counting that. For people who are just normal functioning for the most part, you're accountable for your own emotions. Like, that person didn't make you mad. You got mad because of something that person did. Like, it's the same thing, but it's different because you're taking accountability for your emotional reactions. So with that in mind, you go back to the scenario where they're playing games, and the reasons they get mad sometimes, after they realize what they're getting mad about, they wind up changing their thought process around it on their own, because they realize, like, why am I getting mad about this? Like, I'm trying to get better, but then I'm contradicting myself because I'm focusing on this aspect of myself. Or, like, a lot of people are like, I'm a failure, so they reinforce it, similar to what you're talking about before. It's like, you didn't drop your combo every single time. You're just hyper focusing on your failures and not acknowledging your victories. A lot of people have a hard time, in my experience, acknowledging their victories. There's obviously the people who do it too much, but for the people who kind of get stuck in a plateau because they're doubting themselves, like, that tends to be what they do. So I could ramble about that for a good while, but I wanted to bring that up before I forgot about it.
Yeah, see, I love this conversation, man. This is like, it's like food for me. I haven't even eaten and I'm full. I'm just like chilling, feel like nourished.
I wanted to ask if you've heard of a book called The Art of Learning.
Yeah, that's from that dude who was a chess player and he became like a martial artist. Yeah, I've never read it, and I know he has a movie, right? Isn't there like a movie or something?
Searching for Robbie Fisher's a movie. I don't know.
Okay,
I don't think he. So his dad wrote the book Searching for Robbie Fisher, which was based off of him. Josh Waitzkin is his name. Josh Waitzkin, one of the youngest chess prodigies in America. And then after he got older, he switched to martial arts, and he wrote a book about his process of, like, learning chess. Because you're talking about chess before, and then going over to martial arts, and then how the concepts of learning chess transferred over to martial arts and other life experiences kind of blended with each other. He does a really good job of articulating that, talking about getting into the zone, and kind of like mental clarity, which there's a lot of concepts that help me understand how to articulate that, how to access it myself, make it a little bit more tangible. And I think that's something that you would really appreciate. I'm surprised you haven't read it already, but, like, I think once you read it, I'm like, this is a book that makes sense for sure.
Yeah, Kaizen recommended that book to me. Like, he's been working since 2012, so he recommended that book to me. Like 2013 is when we started working together. He recommended that book to me in like 2013, so I still haven't read it.
Oh man, I have the audiobook. So I travel a lot.
Listen to it.
He actually narrates it, so it's by him. I like when people who write their own books do the narration, and I felt like you can kind of hear his passion behind it. It's a good listen. I think I have the book as well, but I just listen to it like once a year just to kind of refresh myself and go through it and break it down. It's really, really good. Okay.
I'm like just now getting into audiobooks because I used to have the hardest time. Because you see, like, the way I talk, right? Like, the way I talk is the way I think. So when I hear something interesting, I'm like, whoa. And then I'm just like connecting all these dots. And by the time the dots are connected, it's like 5 chapters later. It's 7 o'clock at night, and I'm like, bro, what the hell? What just happened? I was just on the first sentence of the first page. Like, what just happened, bro? Like, what? And I have to restart it all over again. So I just get really annoyed, and that's why I just kept reading. So, when I read, it's just like, and then I can just stop, and I can go back to it. But I'm starting to get into the habit of, like, being able to follow along with audiobooks and not get too lost in the sauce. Audiobooks are dope, though, man. So
they are. When it comes to focus, right? So I have ADD. I was diagnosed when I was 17, and I'm 35 now. And I play fighting games with... I practice fighting games with the concept of wanting to compete. But I put in about a casual player's amount of time. Maybe a little more than the casual player. But I try to make sure that when I'm playing, I'm paying attention to my attention span. Like concepts like vigilance, which is the act of looking for information, right? Being aware of it and then consistently being aware of it. Because I remember I realized, like, a great example is V-Trigger 1 Zangief. I'm a Fong main, so I can't just throw out projectiles from mid-screen once V-Trigger is active. And for like a year and a half, I would lose to Zangief's only because I didn't look at the meter and then make a decision based off of that meter. And then basically after that, it's like 2 choices, and it's basically a 50-50. and I have to guess at that point. But the
Yeah.
reason that I would lose or be put in that situation is because I wouldn't stop throwing projectiles. When it comes to like that simple concept, looking at the meter, being aware of it consistently, there's multiple different skills there, because there's vigilance, which is the act of looking for it, but then there's also being focused and making sure that you're not paying attention to things that aren't important to it. But there's also muscle memory, so that you don't have to think too much about the acts that you're going to do, and it's more automatic. So from your perspective, when it comes to putting these skills all together, mainly like mental attention span focus stuff, what is your advice or experience with improving that, and like where did you start and where are you now with that?
All right, so let's say you have an attention span like challenge. Meditation is that's my thing, man. Meditation is just, I recommend that to anybody, because I would struggle, because again, I would just like go off on these mental rants, right, or just deviate off path so easily. It will happen to me in game too, like same thing where it's like we're in this situation, this person has meter, and I saw it and I knew, but then I got sidetracked and another desire popped up. That's where the mindfulness comes into play, right? So I think it's important to know your triggers. Know your triggers. What triggers the thing, and then what's your typical routine? So like, what is it that causes you to deviate? And then what do you usually deviate to? So that way you not only have like a safety mechanism to remind you, these protocols in place to remind you of when you're about to do something, but when you're also in the act of doing it, right? I think because you don't have to be entirely preventative. Like, so let's say you're trying to maintain focus. Focus isn't just like being on the topic or the subject, or and always in line with your intentions and stuff like that, but being able to reset yourself. I think that's an important part of focus, because that's something that can atrophy too, because you're human. No matter what, like, you're not only gonna like lose focus, but you're gonna be emotional, you're gonna be frustrated, you're gonna, like, all these things are gonna happen. So I think like the art of resetting yourself is powerful, right? So for me, like what I would suggest is, let's say like you have ADD, right? How do you turn that into a strength? Have you ever thought about that with fighting games?
Oh yeah, a lot. So I think a lot. I think really fast, and so I try to utilize that and put that energy into just what I'm doing. Like, it's hard to articulate, but I just make sure that I'm looking around for the information. So like, this was years ago. It's kind of funny because when I started figuring out what I was doing wrong, I analyzed myself. I have a friend that plays Zangief, so I would play him, and then I would just pay attention to what he would do if I stopped throwing projectiles when you have V trigger. And I wasn't playing to win. I was like, okay, what are you gonna do now? And like, it threw off the whole entire dynamic of the game, because basically the meta of the game was we fight until he gets V trigger, and then he sucks me, and then it's a guess, and then like I can fight my way out of it. That was like how that game was always played with us when we played. And then after that, I would just pay attention to what he did. And then I started playing neutral. I started focusing on my neutral instead. I'm like, all right, I have Fong, I have good buttons, I have double hitting buttons, so I can break his armor if he tries to just beat like shenanigans with his armor and stuff. And I wound up improving my neutral as a result. I wound up improving my whiff punishes. I started focusing on different skills, because the game, like, I acknowledge that the game is different once he has V trigger. The same rules don't apply anymore, because he can now just pull me in on reaction. Startup is too long. I had to figure that out. And so, to go back to your question of how do I use ADD to my advantage, it's like I think really fast. So I can plan far ahead in the future as long as I have my muscle memory down. So I would just analyze what he was doing, pay attention to it, see what options I would have, put a lot of attention into whiff punishing, like heavy punch. They want to, do charge heavy punch. I'm like, okay, well, I'll punish you for that if you're going to do that. Anti-airing, that sort of thing, and then making them not be able to play the game they want to play. And then I like psychology. I like paying attention to how people do things. So I'm thinking about how they're thinking, and I take that and I apply it to their style. I'm like, okay, well, now they're thrown off because I'm not throwing projectiles anymore. What does a Fong with no projectiles do? And some of them get confident, start walking in.
And sliding, electric sliding in, right?
Yeah, I'll play really, really aggressive just to like throw them off a little bit, because it's fun, and also that's just like one of the play styles I like to do just to kind of mix it up a little bit.
So what I took away from that, like just to like be concise, is it's curiosity. It's the curiosity that brings you down the rabbit hole. So if you could structure your curiosity, then it always feels like there's something new in front of you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So I think that's what will happen, because once you realize, you're like, wait, there's something beyond this. It's not like that's the end of the journey, right? Is that thing, that direct challenge in front of you. It's like now there's an entire world behind it. There's a Narnia in this closet of experience, right? Like once you've stopped the V trigger, application, now it's like, oh wow, there's way more to Street Fighter. I think that's what will help people, is it's just being curious. I think that's the cure to a lot of things, man, is like being curious, because children are naturally curious, right? But when you become an adult, your ego tends to take over, because that's what we start to operate off of in society to maintain stability and to just move around and stuff socially, in the social construct, whatever. And you notice it's the people that excel at their craft, that maintain curiosity about their craft. They still have this childlike element to whatever it is that they do. Like a child's interpretation of failure is just like non-existent, because like if you teach a kid, you never teach your son how to walk, right? He just walked. You weren't like, hey son, you gotta like move your hip flexors this way, you gotta plant your feet like at this angle, bend at the hip. You didn't teach him any of that. He literally was like goo goo gaga, and he fell and busted his ass, and he got up and was like, okay, let me try this. And he just kept doing it. We have this intuitive system to learn, but it's buried by all of this garbage that we got in adulthood. Like, of course, there's obviously pros to everything, right? So I'm not saying everything is useless in being an adult. Like, obviously, like being self-sufficient and stuff like that, eventually being interdependent and, working with others and stuff like that, and being of bringing contribution to the lives of other people and your community, stuff like that. That's all fine and dandy.
I'll have links in the description down below, but just in case you want to get coaching from him, you can go to metafy.com, metafy.gg/@Zaferino1. Basically, all of his social media is at Zaferino1, so you can find it on there. I'll have links for you guys if you're listening to the audio version or the YouTube version later on. But thank you again for joining me. I appreciate it, and I will see you guys in the next one.